The address of 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester has etched itself into the annals of British infamy. For 2 decades, Fred and Rose West indulged their dark desires for both sexual gratification and murder within the confines of this nightmarish residence. The investigation into their daughter's mysterious disappearance ultimately led authorities to the doorstep of the Wests, where detectives began to unravel a chilling legacy of violence that was unprecedented in its scope. This narrative chronicles the descent of Fred and Rose West into the depths of evil, marking them as 2 of history's most malevolent figures. Their notoriety is unparalleled in British lore, as they perpetrated heinous acts against 9 women, including their daughter, within their so-called House of Horrors, while also being linked to 3 additional victims buried in the surrounding Gloucestershire area. When revelations emerged in February 1994, the media had only begun to scratch the surface of the couple's terrifying existence behind the closed doors of 25 Cromwell Street. Yet, the roots of Fred and Rose's horrific saga stretch back to 1969. At the age of 28, Fred was married to Rena and raising a young family, yet he found himself fixated on a 15-year-old girl named Rosemary Letts. Rose had recently relocated to Gloucestershire, where Fred had spent his formative years in the village of Much Markle. An acquaintance remarked on Fred's troubled upbringing, noting, "He was the eldest boy in a family that subjected him to considerable abuse, particularly from his mother, who sexually exploited him. His loss of innocence was a tragic consequence of a deeply dysfunctional household." Similarly, Rose's childhood was marred by dysfunction. She endured abuse at the hands of her father, who began violating her at a tender age. Thus, her perception of familial norms was irrevocably distorted. Fred, accustomed to pursuing his desires relentlessly, set his sights on Rose, determined to claim what he wanted. Upon their first encounter, an undeniable chemistry sparked between the couple. Rose resided in the same quaint village where Fred kept his caravan, and their paths crossed at the Cheltenham bus station. By 1970, merely a year after their fateful meeting, they had established a shared life in Gloucester, alongside Fred's stepdaughter Charmaine. The absence of his wife, Rena, was palpable. Rose was expecting their first daughter, Heather, a new chapter in their tumultuous journey. The shadows of their troubled childhoods cast a long influence on their unconventional approach to family life. Fast forward to 1992, the Gloucestershire police were on a quest to locate Heather West. In 1987, at the tender age of 16, Fred and Rose's eldest child mysteriously disappeared from their home. Fred asserted that Heather had simply run away, yet no official missing person report was ever filed. Following disturbing allegations of child abuse at 25 Cromwell Street, detectives began to delve into Heather's fate. Chief Constable Tony Butler led the investigation for Gloucestershire Police. One of the children, Butler recounts, shared with a school friend the troubling events occurring at home. That friend, in turn, confided in a police officer on patrol, which set in motion a child protection protocol that ultimately led to the gathering of crucial evidence. As a result, 5 of the West children were placed into protective care, and the police commenced their inquiries. They were questioned about the grim realities of life at 25 Cromwell Street. Among the revelations was a chilling family jest. "You better watch out, because if you don't stop causing trouble for your dad or mum, you'll end up like Heather, 2 down and 3 across in the patio." The concrete patio behind their home was arranged in squares, reminiscent of a crossword puzzle, and the morbid joke suggested that Fred had buried Heather at 2 down and 3 across. This peculiar notion of Heather beneath the patio, was persistently brought to our attention, Butler remarked. Consequently, we began to regard this issue with the seriousness it warranted. We were aware that Heather had vanished from her home, prompting us to attempt to locate her. Yet despite extensive inquiries, she seemed to have simply evaporated from existence. In February 1994, the authorities resolved to investigate whether the family jest held a more sinister truth than the children had comprehended. Equipped with a search warrant, they commenced excavations beneath the patio of 25 Cromwell Street. Upon their arrival, Fred and Rose were present at the residence. The officers proceeded to the rear garden and initiated their digging. Sensing the impending conclusion, Fred requested an interview with the police. He proposed they relocate to the police station, and so they departed. During this conversation, Fred confessed that Heather's remains lay in the garden, albeit he insisted they were searching in the incorrect location. Later that day, he returned with the officers and pointed out where he believed Heather was interred. The following day, as officers excavated that specific area, they unearthed a femur, which was subsequently examined by a forensic pathologist and confirmed to be human remains. It was identified as belonging to Heather. Meanwhile, Rose was being interrogated at Cheltenham Police Station when the news reached her and her attorney, Leo Wadley. Upon learning that Heather's remains had been discovered, she gasped audibly, visibly shaken. Wadley remarked, "How does one interpret that reaction? Was it a mother's shock and sorrow, or the distress of a murderer facing exposure?" "At that moment," he elaborated, "I was convinced that she was genuinely shocked and distressed, unaware of the full extent of Fred's actions." Naturally, at that juncture, the focus was solely on Heather. However, the situation unraveled rather swiftly. As the excavation progressed, the police uncovered far more than they had anticipated beneath the patio at 25 Cromwell Street. In their search, they discovered not merely 2 legs or thigh bones, but 3. The detective conducting the interrogation addressed West, stating, "Unless Heather possesses an extraordinary 3rd leg, there must be another body." Without a moment's pause, Fred replied, "Indeed, that must be the other girl, Shirley." The authorities were on the verge of uncovering the long-buried secrets that Fred and Rose West had concealed within the walls of 25 Cromwell Street for over 20 years, revelations poised to astonish the entire nation. Fred disclosed to the investigators that the additional body belonged to his former lover, Shirley Robinson, who had vanished in 1978 while heavily pregnant with his child. He further confessed that a 3rd body would be discovered in the garden, claiming it belonged to a friend of Shirley's. Throughout the interrogation, he maintained one crucial assertion, that his wife, Rose, was entirely unaware of any of the bodies. Journalist David Cantor, who reported on the case, shared his impressions of Fred's character. "I found him to be quite unsettling. He tended to ingratiate himself with others in a rather obsequious manner, often accompanied by a nervous giggle, trivializing serious matters." To complicate matters further, Fred's narrative was inconsistent. He oscillated between acknowledging and denying the murders, insisting to detectives that all fatalities were accidental. He sought to be charged with manslaughter rather than murder. This posed a significant challenge for pathologists to refute. When a body has been interred for years, it becomes exceedingly difficult for a pathologist to conduct a thorough examination. The absence of skin, muscle, and organs, the very elements that reveal injury or disease, complicates their analysis, forcing them to speculate on what may be missing. Determining the cause of death proved arduous, as did identifying the 3rd victim concealed beneath the patio, amidst a staggering count of approximately 10,000 missing women recorded at that time. Through meticulous examination of dental records, specialists were able to confirm the identity of the 3rd victim as Allison Chambers, a mere 16 years of age when she vanished in 1979. This revelation casts doubt on Fred's assertion that she could have been a companion of Shirley Robinson. The evidence of torture on her remains leaves no room for ambiguity. The nature of the perpetrator's actions leans more towards psychological manipulation than mere pathology, yet it unmistakably suggests elements of torture and possibly sexual violence. When a pathologist encounters such findings, the implications shift from accidental manslaughter to a deliberate act of cruelty. This evidence firmly establishes that West did not inadvertently take the lives of these young women. Rather, he subjected them to torture, sexual assault, and premeditated murder. However, the question arises, was Fred acting without Rose's knowledge? The police remained skeptical. Crucially, these bodies were discovered in the residence shared by Fred and Rose, making it implausible that she was unaware of the horrific events transpiring within those walls. The house itself was exceedingly small, rendering it unimaginable that a young woman, or women, could be hidden there without the awareness of every resident. Regardless of any attempts to silence them or conceal them in the cellar, the reality of the situation would have been impossible to ignore. In their pursuit of justice, the police delved into missing person reports, seeking additional potential victims amidst a staggering 10,000 women reported missing across the nation, a daunting task that seemed to stretch into infinity. During this period, efforts were made to trace individuals from children's homes to ensure their safety. The scale of the forensic investigation was unprecedented, involving an immense volume of materials. Among the missing individuals, two names emerged prominently: Lucy Partington, a 21-year-old student last seen at a bus stop in Gloucester in 1973, and Linda Guff, a 19-year-old who also disappeared that same year. Her last recorded residence was 25 Cromwell Street. Fred and Rose had developed a particular method. They would seek out young women who were in precarious situations, those fleeing from home, from care facilities, or parental control. These individuals were particularly susceptible. Time and again, Fred would collect, often accompanied by Rose, young women who appeared somewhat adrift, typically at bus stops. They consistently targeted those in vulnerable circumstances. The dynamic of being a couple undoubtedly aided them in ensnaring their victims, as the women they pursued were more inclined to trust a pair. Thus, when they picked up a hitchhiker, the presence of a woman suggested safety. Rose was already well versed in the art of grooming. It was second nature to her. Victims often recounted how she spoke in a soft, soothing tone, a skill she had clearly mastered. Linda Goff was never formally reported missing, yet her family was actively searching for her during the time of her disappearance. Linda's mother visited the house, knocked on the door, and was greeted by Rose West. Inquiring about Linda's whereabouts, she was told that her daughter had gone to Weston-super-Mare. The sight of Rose wearing Linda's slippers struck her, and she noticed Linda's clothing hanging on the line. Although Linda's mother accepted Rose's explanation that her daughter had moved on from Cromwell Street, as media coverage intensified, other women who had encountered the Wests began to come forward. The investigation gained momentum when Caroline Roberts reached out to the police, offering her assistance. Having seen the news coverage, she disclosed that she had been sexually assaulted by both Fred and Rose in 1972. She had been acquainted with them for some time after they offered her a ride while she was hitchhiking, and she even took on a brief role as their nanny. However, a traumatic event prompted her to file a complaint against them. They had invited her back to their home, and upon her arrival, she was assaulted in the vehicle by both Fred and Rose. Following this, she was restrained and subjected to aggressive sexual acts. Fortunately, she managed to escape and reported the incident to her mother, who subsequently informed the authorities. Fred and Rose were arrested for rape and other sexual crimes at that time. Due to her fear of confronting them in court and her feelings of shame regarding the incident, the charges against the Wests were reduced to indecent exposure, resulting in a fine of £100. Nevertheless, the information Caroline provided to the police helped establish a connection between Rose and the crimes associated with the bodies found at Cromwell Street. This evidence indicated a pattern of aggressive sexual behavior on her part. The specifics of the sexual acts described bore striking similarities to the bindings and gags found with the victims, suggesting a consistent modus operandi. This case relied heavily on the testimonies of survivors, as their accounts offered insights that the physical evidence could not convey, highlighting the importance of their voices in the investigation. On March 4, 1994, law enforcement began searching the interior of the house, suspecting that the dark cellar might hold additional bodies. On that same day, upon learning of the police activity at Gloucester Station, Fred West made a shocking confession in a handwritten note presented to detectives. The document stated, "I, Frederick West, hereby empower my solicitor, Howard Ogden, to inform Superintendent Bennett of my intention to confess to approximately 9 additional homicides, specifically naming Charmaine, Rena, Linda Goff, and others yet to be identified. Signed, F. West." Can you envision the atmosphere? It borders on the surreal. They were not confronting a monstrous figure, a man of considerable size capable of brutality with his bare hands. Instead, they faced a seemingly inconsequential individual who nonetheless admitted to 9 murders. At that moment, the police grasped, perhaps for the first time, the true nature of the evil they were confronting. Fred was once again escorted back to the residence, where he pointed out the locations of some of the buried remains, particularly in the cellar area. Consequently, a meticulous search of the entire property was initiated. Fred insisted that Rose had no part in these heinous acts. This was the implication. He sought to shield her from culpability. Fred accepted full responsibility. They had a pact. She would remain loyal, visit him, and he envisioned his release in a few years. However, the instant Rose learned of his admissions regarding the murders, she severed all ties. That was the end. He was abandoned, and she refused any further communication. On March 5, 1994, the global media flocked to the residence of Fred and Rose West in Gloucester. Authorities had unearthed 3 bodies from their garden: their daughter Heather, Fred's expectant mistress Shirley Robinson, and the missing teenager Allison Chambers. Detectives then shifted their focus indoors, commencing the excavation of the cellar at 25 Cromwell Street. Among the grim signatures of Fred and Rose's victims was the removal of fingers and toes. As the excavation progressed, officers accompanied Fred to a field near Much Marcle, where he claimed that digging would reveal the remains of his first wife, Rena, who had vanished in 1971, just a year after Fred and Rose began their life together. Rena and Fred had shared 9 years of marriage, yet her disappearance had never been reported. An officer recounted, he was led to the fields, and he indicated a spot near a hedge where he claimed to have buried Rena Costello. The tally of victims had now reached 6, and within the confines of the cellar at Cromwell Street, even more bodies were being unearthed. Juanita Mott, a former lodger missing since 1975, Carol Cooper, who vanished after leaving the cinema in 1973, along with 2 names the authorities had been diligently pursuing: Lucy Partington and, concealed beneath the family bathroom, Linda Guff. By March 8, 1994, less than 2 weeks into their investigation at Cromwell Street, police had uncovered 10 victims. Most had been interred 2 decades prior, during the peak of Fred and Rose's heinous activities. Beyond the sexual nature of the murders, their bond was evolving, though evolving may not fully capture the essence. They were increasingly isolating themselves from the outside world, a phenomenon known as folie à deux, a shared madness that fortified their connection. 9 bodies had been exhumed from Cromwell Street, alongside one more, Rena West, Fred's first wife, found in a field near Much Marcle. Yet Fred's revelations were not complete. While he denied responsibility for her death, he suggested to the police that Rena's friend, Anne McFall, might lie buried in a nearby field. Anne is believed to be Fred's first victim, tragically murdered in 1967 while 6 months pregnant. True to his gruesome pattern, he dismembered the bodies before burial, not interring them as mere skeletons, but rather compressing them into tubes, with the torso, head, arms, and legs separated and crammed into a smaller grave. This method complicated the search for the remains. During the 2 months dedicated to locating Anne McFall's body, police apprehended and charged Rose West with murder. Each victim was met with her unwavering declaration of innocence. "I'm innocent." The evidence presented by the police was largely circumstantial, leading defense attorneys to argue that there was insufficient linkage between her and the heinous acts. Fred, however, confessed to the murders, asserting that Rose had played no part in them. Thus, the initial task was to evaluate the robustness of the case against Rose, who staunchly denied any involvement. Where was the evidence? As the police continued their meticulous search at Cromwell Street, they shifted their focus to another location, 25 Midland Road, the couple's first residence in Gloucester. Investigators suspected that the remains of Charmaine West, Fred's stepdaughter from his marriage to Rena, might be concealed within the premises or the garden. An exhaustive search commenced. At the time of Charmaine's tragic demise, she resided at 25 Midland Road, a home that Fred and Rose had since vacated. However, when the police excavated beneath the kitchen floor, they unearthed Charmaine's remains. She had not been seen since the age of 8 in 1971 and had never been reported missing. That same year, Fred had been incarcerated for 9 months due to motoring offenses and theft. The police believed they had finally made a significant discovery. Charmaine must have been murdered by Rose during Fred's imprisonment. As the high-profile trial approached, the police faced the daunting task of establishing that Rose West was equally culpable as her husband, Fred. Yet before they could present their case, a significant obstacle emerged. In December 1994, 10 months after the search for Heather West began at 25 Cromwell Street, the remains of 12 young women were discovered throughout Gloucester. Fred West was suspected of being the perpetrator behind all these tragic deaths, while the police continued their quest for evidence to implicate Rose in 10 of the murders. Both were arrested, charged, and awaiting trial. However, on January 1st, 1995, Fred West took his secrets with him to the grave. He was in custody at Winston Green Prison in Birmingham when he was found dead in his cell on that fateful day. He met his end by hanging, and it was later concluded that he had taken his own life. Fred West was a man of remarkable cunning. His suicide was orchestrated with the same meticulousness he employed in hiding his victims. He skillfully manipulated the prison staff into believing he was a harmless, amiable individual, eager to assist in any way they desired. Indeed, he offered his services stating, "I can mend shirts. Don't worry, just give me something to occupy my time while I await my trial." Over several weeks, he painstakingly crafted a rope, utilizing fragments of his bed's blanket and pieces of his shirt, all while carefully concealing his intentions. He had resolved that he would not face trial and would never reveal the full extent of his heinous acts. Fred's control over Rose had completely unraveled. She made it abundantly clear that she wanted nothing further to do with him, even ignoring him in court. Beyond his tumultuous relationship with Rose, he exhibited a profound lack of empathy towards others. To him, people were mere objects to be exploited and discarded. The reality was that he understood the gravity of his situation. He had confessed, the remains had been discovered, and the horrific narrative of his victims had begun to unfold. For those acquainted with the West family, this was merely another grim chapter in a saga that had first emerged 10 months prior. As one neighbor poignantly remarked, "If Frederick West truly did take his own life, it seems almost fitting that a man accused of extinguishing so many lives would ultimately extinguish his own." Fred's suicide posed a significant dilemma for law enforcement, jeopardizing the entire investigation. The police were in a state of desperation. While Fred had admitted to 11 murders, Rose had consistently maintained her innocence. Without concrete evidence, there loomed a genuine possibility that Rose West might evade justice. She believed the case would dissipate, but it did not. Prosecutors sought undeniable evidence to establish that Rose was solely accountable for the tragic demise of her stepdaughter, Charmaine. They enlisted the expertise of forensic odontologist Professor David Whitaker. In a remarkable turn of events, the police uncovered that a prominent national newspaper had obtained a collection of large professional negatives. These images revealed astonishing detail in Charmaine's baby teeth, allowing Professor Whitaker to employ facial superimposition technology to achieve a precise match. The alignment in tilt, position, and intricate grooving of the teeth was impeccable, confirming their authenticity. On October 3, 1995, the world's media converged upon Winchester Crown Court to cover one of the most sensational trials in recent history. Rose's trial garnered international attention, a rarity for a woman facing charges of 10 murders. As proceedings commenced, Rose West entered a plea of not guilty to all 10 counts, which included the 9 girls discovered buried at Cromwell Street alongside Charmaine. However, the evidence against her was compelling. Professor Whitaker's findings swayed the jury, leading them to conclude that Rosemary West was guilty of all 10 murders. He confidently asserted that he could determine the precise time frame of the child's death, corroborated by evidence that Fred was incarcerated during that period, thus eliminating him as a suspect. When the first guilty verdicts were announced, Rose appeared utterly defeated, yet her demeanor remained stoic. No flicker of emotion, no outbursts, just an unsettling calm. In delivering the sentence, Mr. Justice Mantell recommended that Rose West should never see freedom again. She was promptly returned to Holloway Prison, a stark 300 miles from Gloucester, where Rosemary West would begin her life sentence. Currently, Rose West is enduring a life sentence at Low Newton Prison in Durham. In 1996, merely a year after the haunting revelations of 25 Cromwell Street came to light, the infamous structure was razed to the ground. In its stead, a serene public walkway now graces the area. Yet, the haunting memories of Fred and Rose West, along with their nightmarish abode, remain indelibly etched in the minds of many. In January 1999, law enforcement responded to urgent calls from a neighbor who reported hearing screams emanating from a residence on Carlson Boulevard. The distressing cries persisted for over 30 seconds before an unsettling silence enveloped the area. Initially, the neighbor attempted to investigate the situation personally, but, reconsidering the potential danger, opted to contact 911 instead. Upon their arrival, officers found the front door securely locked, yet the back door stood slightly ajar. Inside, they made a harrowing discovery. The lifeless body of Mika Wadley lay on her bedroom floor. Although deceased, her body retained a disturbing warmth. Her hands were cruelly bound with shoelaces, and she had suffered the indignity of rape before being smothered to death. A buck knife was discovered beneath her body. At the tender age of 28, Mika's vibrant life was tragically extinguished, leaving behind an 18-month-old daughter and a multitude of family members who cherished her memory and relentlessly pursued the truth. Her sister painted a portrait of Mika as a vivacious individual, always adorned with a smile and surrounded by friends. She maintained the same circle of friends since elementary school, loyal companions to this day. Just a genuinely sweet person, she recalled. Mika's niece fondly described her aunt as a beloved presence. My favorite auntie. She was beautiful, outgoing, and intelligent. She relished spending time with others and embracing joy, she reminisced. The police launched a thorough investigation, initially honing in on a man with whom Mika had spent the previous evening. However, he was ultimately exonerated as a suspect. With no further leads, the case grew increasingly cold. Nevertheless, for the next 2 decades, authorities diligently pursued the investigation, analyzing the DNA recovered from beneath Mika's fingernails and a bloodstain found in the bedroom. In 2002, a mixed DNA profile was established from the swabs taken from her hands and the bloodstain. This profile was submitted to the Department of Justice for a search of their offender database, yet the inquiry yielded no promising results. 18 years later, in 2020, a new wave of DNA testing was initiated, concentrating on previously unexamined fingernail clippings and ligatures. This meticulous examination yielded a male DNA profile, which was subsequently submitted in October to the Department of Justice's DNA Databank program by the Contra Costa County Crime Lab, aiming to conduct a familial search within the state's DNA index system. By April 2021, the investigation unveiled a potential first-degree relative of the suspected assailant, although this individual was ultimately excluded from suspicion. Nevertheless, law enforcement had a name to pursue, yet they chose to maintain discretion till they could substantiate the evidence. This task proved to be complex, as the suspect had already passed away. In September 2021, detectives successfully located an immediate relative of the deceased suspect. A buccal swab was procured and sent to the crime lab for analysis, and later that month, investigators received the crucial confirmation. Mika's murderer was identified as 35-year-old Jerry Lee Henderson. Henderson was known to Mika. They shared a mutual friend and frequently visited the same residence. However, after overstaying his welcome, he sought refuge at Mika's home, unaware that she would return. It is believed that this was the moment he attacked her and subsequently fled. Following the incident, various rumors and speculations emerged regarding the circumstances of the murder. Mika's sister sought to clarify the situation, as many had mischaracterized it as a domestic violence incident. She firmly denied these assertions, explaining that Henderson and her sister were merely friends who attended the same college, devoid of any romantic involvement. He was a friend of her friend Terry, and they both knew him, she elucidated. At a press conference held on April 21, 2022, law enforcement officials disclosed that the individual responsible for the tragic murder of Mika had been identified, though he had succumbed to a suspected drug overdose just 11 days following the crime. Acting Richmond Police Chief Louis Tarona initially refrained from revealing the suspect's name, asserting, "We are entirely certain he is the perpetrator. I refuse to grant him any recognition by disclosing his identity." During the conference, Mika's niece raised a poignant question. Why is it acceptable for him to remain anonymous? We are aware of his actions. Why can't the family be informed? They regard him as a hero. He is no hero. He is a murderer. In response, Tarona challenged the notion of bestowing fame upon someone guilty of such heinous acts. However, under the weight of public sentiment, he ultimately revealed that Henderson was the suspect in Mika's murder. Following the press conference, Mika's sister spoke with Oxygen.com, expressing that the event fell short of adequately addressing the gravity of the situation, leaving her feeling both hurt and humiliated. She clarified that Mika had indeed reached the hospital, where she witnessed the medical team working diligently to save her. While the identification of Henderson provided a semblance of closure, her sister emphasized that Mika had fought valiantly, which ultimately aided investigators in obtaining the DNA evidence necessary to apprehend Henderson. Mika would have celebrated her 50th birthday this year and would have been a proud grandmother. Her daughter has now embraced motherhood herself, her sister reflected. When given the floor at the press conference, she poignantly remarked that the quest for answers regarding the deaths of loved ones must come to an end, urging communities to put a stop to the senseless violence. In a heartfelt statement, California Attorney General Rob Bonta conveyed his earnest hope that this resolution offers Mika Wadley's family a measure of solace. Bonta emphasized, "We shall leave no avenue unexplored in our pursuit of justice and the revelation of truth. While nothing can restore a cherished life, we are resolutely dedicated to illuminating the truth in our relentless quest for justice."